Hi, I'm Jennifer Beall, the Events and Communications Coordinator here at Brucemore, and I'm out on the ground today with landscape architect Brett Seelman to talk about his involvement with our landscape recovery project.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is an honor to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Could you tell us just a little bit about your role as a landscape architect with this project, particularly since the damage caused by the derecho?
Yeah, the derecho was a devastating event that impacted everyone in this community. And when I think of a place like Brucemore, the amenity that it is for our community, the layered history that it has, it's a landscape architect's role, especially for a project like this, is to celebrate Brucemore and the grounds as a piece of art. The mansion, the architecture of the mansion itself is a piece of art. The Marvin cones and the Grant Woods that hang on the walls are pieces of art. The Grant Woods sleeping porch. But the landscape, too, is a piece of art. And as a landscape architect, my role is to really steward the preservation of the landscape as a piece of art, as a living, breathing piece of art. And O.C. Simons talked about it through his projects. He's, the landscape architect designer that designed Brucemore, that he sought to make the country more beautiful. And I think when we are stewarding this landscape into the next generation, into responding to what it's been, to what it could be, it's important to remember the solace that a garden can bring. And for our community to restore this property to what it was during the Douglas era, during that 1906 to 1937 time period when the Douglas family lived on the property. I'm excited to bring people back to Brucemore, to restore this garden to a place that no one's ever seen, and to let them enjoy the beauty of it, and to let them understand decisions that we made based off of all of our research in the archives to really bring it back to its glory days during that time period.
Yeah, I love that idea of thinking of the landscape as a piece of art along with, the architecture, like you said, the art that's inside the house, because I think we don't often think about the detailed planning that goes into something like this. And,
right.
You mentioned going back to that vision from O.C. Simons. During that process, did you have to consult any archival materials to reflect that?
Yeah, we spent many days in the archives, and through that, we also then were able to catalog the documents and the imagery and the notes and the letters. And through that really started the process of even diving further into them. There's an element of soaking everything in and then letting it simmer, where we really needed to start to tear in. And there would be times where I would just be infatuated over an image, a single image, trying to tear apart what time period it was from, how we could restore, what's a part of this image that might still be on the grounds today. What are elements that would make this more historic if we preserved it and restored it to that Douglas era time period? It really allowed me to get to know who the families were that lived at Brucemore. I think that compared to other projects, the families that lived at Brucemore had the means to have a lot of photography taken of their lives, taken of their properties, and we can learn from that. We get to learn from that, and we get to restore this property to what it should be, how it should have, what it was during the Douglas era. I always say this when we're in our team meetings and we're trying to make decisions, valid decisions that make a lot of sense. I say, imagine as if O.C. Simons or Mrs. Douglas were standing right next to you, and what decisions they would make. We're in a way, we're stewarding this property. We're not making decisions based off our own thoughts. We're making decisions off of a garden that was here and one that is very well documented and one that we could piece back together to really restore it to its glory days.
Yeah, that's awesome. Trying to think about, I love that idea of thinking about them actually standing here with us. I think, as professionals in the public history field, that's something we really aspire to. So it's great to hear your thoughts on trying to bring that out with the stewardship of the landscape as well. I guess when you were going through some of those planning processes and, you talked about looking at some of those images and some of the things that you found really important that you wanted to just pour over and analyze. What are some like elements that are particularly unique about the Brucemore landscape plan that you're kind of drawing from with those records?
There's a lot of ways to answer this question. I'll touch on a couple of them. So first of all, my work at Brucemore really piggybacked off the work that Heidi Holman did at Iowa State University. And one of the components that she discovered was what I call the ridgeline hedgerow. And that is the ridgeline that separates the alfalfa field and the formal garden. And it was a component to the design of those that have prepared cultural landscape reports or working on what the landscape should be. They didn't see this ridgeline hedgerow. And part of that reason was before the derecho and during the Hall era. The Halls had initiated an effort after the Dutch elm disease came through Cedar Rapids in the 1960s to plant a lot of evergreens on the property, more than likely a response to creating more privacy.
Sure.
And along this ridge line, they planted evergreens on both the outside and inside components of that hedge. And over time, that hedge got shaded out and became a non-extant feature of the property. And when we started to look at images from that time period, and we're able to see this hedgerow, and this hedgerow has 3 distinct arches, which makes it very unique to Brucemore. And it became a component that all of us got very excited about because it created a lot of clarity in this garden between the formal garden and the alfalfa field, between the space that we're sitting in now and the garden house. It created a lot of clarity, which we didn't have before because of the amount and quantity of evergreens that were really planted from the 1960s on as a response to revegetating the property post-Dutch elm disease. Now with that, as we started to overlay aerials from the 1930s, it became very apparent that other hedges defined the garden rooms on the property. And I have to say this is one of the most exciting components of what we're going to be doing. We're really going to be creating definition of these different garden rooms, and that definition comes from the hedges that once existed on the property. And what I love about that is the scale of the hedges are all different, from the peony hedge that has become an identity of Brucemore along the driveway to what we're going to do, a Philadelphus mock orange hedge along this ridgeline. It gets 10 to 12 feet tall and wide. It's going to give very clear separation between the alfalfa field and the formal garden. It has a showy white flower in early spring that smells beautiful. So restoring this hedge layer is really going to allow the public to come into Brucemore and see a landscape that they've never seen before. And I'm really excited about that. With that, there's another component that makes Brucemore really unique. And O.C. Simons, an incredible landscape architect, he considered himself a landscape designer. He did not like the term architect. And what I love about writings that he has, books that he has, literature that he has that we can comb through, and I look at that compared to the Brucemore landscape, you can tell how involved Mrs. Douglas was with making this garden.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things with this garden that are not the typical O.C. Simons design. And when you look at the pond, when I look at the water of the pond, the layout of the pond, the long access and the short access, you see O.C. Simons through and through. When you look at this hedge layer, the hedges on this property are very uncharacteristic of the quantity of them. And you could almost imagine those conversations between a woman who loved gardening, who was well-traveled, and perhaps had a heavy hand in designing the garden with the designer. And I love that. I love that this is very unique for O.C. Simons to have these very defined garden rooms through hedges.
Yeah, I love that. And I know here at Brucemore, we like to talk a lot about Irene's influence on both the house and the estate, a lot of the work that she put into it after the Douglases obtained the property. So I also love the idea of her kind of orchestrating some of that with O.C. Simons, and the fact that we'll be able to see some of her influence again as we rebuild those areas, especially those hedgerows, which is also exciting for us because our team is actually currently working on prepping for that. I know our viewers might be able to hear a little bit of the working noise in the background.
Construction equipment noise is a good thing.
Yes, it is. It means work is happening.
Work is happening, and yes, we're going to be planting. Megan, if you want to span the camera here, we are going to be planting around a 650-foot linear hedge of mock orange. And the good thing about woody shrubs is that they grow really fast. So we're putting these in at 3 gallons, and within 3 to 5 years' time, this is going to be have body in the garden, have form in the garden.
Yeah, and that's great to think about. You said 3 to 5 years' time, which is awesome because I know some of the trees we're replanting
take longer.
It's going to take longer.
Yeah.
So the fact that in such a relatively short period of time we'll be able to see those changes, I think that's great. And being able to give the community that resource and being able to experience this historic landscape just right here in the middle of Cedar Rapids is so awesome. Yeah, it's great to hear your passion for this project.
Absolutely.
Sounds like you've really enjoyed it. Are there, any other elements of it that have really been a highlight for you that you want to share?
I just want to go back to the role of a landscape architect, and we talk about this a lot through the team meetings, and that one of our largest roles is to really steward this property, not only as the living piece of art, and to allow others to really understand how special it is as a piece of art, and that you would take certain strategies to restore a piece of art that you wouldn't if it wasn't special. This was a really special and unique place. And you hit on this, this is such a community asset for Cedar Rapids. And my earliest memories here, after my wife and I moved back to Iowa, were spent here with my young kids. And where else can you go to have 26 acres of open space in Cedar Rapids?
True.
And it was such a special place for us to picnic and just be here. And so for me, I'm excited to grow old with this restoration, for this to be in my hometown, for this to be an even bigger and better asset to the community. I'm really excited for that. But I'm also excited for the fact that through this process, when we're responding to recovery or process post a natural disaster like the derecho, we have a chance to make this place a better place. We have a chance to make decisions that better respond to a changing environment. And we have a chance to allow this to be an asset to the community for the next generation. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. We are building back better. And like you said, it's not just for today, it's for generations to come.
Right.
So thank you so much for the work you've done on this project.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us today. Yeah,
Thank you.
It's been great to have you here. So,
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate it.